I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. This is your first look at Blood Red Skies by Warlord Games. This is a World War II miniatures game of aerial combat, and the starter set is set in the Battle of Britain in 1940. In order to invade Britain, Hitler had to first use his Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, to destroy the Royal Air Force. However, in what would become one of the finest moments of British military history, the pilots of the RAF defended their country from the Nazis. This early war victory stopped Hitler's advance across Europe. So let's take a look at what's inside this starter set. Inside, we have several booklets here. We have a starter rule book, we have expanded rules, as well as a scenario book. Of course, we all want to talk about the miniatures, right? So we have 6 British miniatures, 6 German miniatures. For the Germans, we have all 6 of them are the BF 109Es. This is the stat card that goes along with the fighters. And for the British, being the Battle of Britain, we have 6 Spitfire II fighters. And then, though they're not miniatures for them, they're also tokens for both British as well as German bombers. So let's take a closer look first at one of the British Spitfires. Now here's one of the Nazi BF 109E fighters. These are plastic miniatures. Also in the box, we have a whole bunch of D6s. Even though they kind of look like they're custom, these are pretty much standard D6s with a spade symbol here for the 6 side of the die. We have an assortment of cards that are used in some of the advanced rules. So you have a whole bunch of flight stands over here, and they can be in one of 3 positions, and this is what the game calls the advantage system. And these 3 angles here are used to track the current status of the aircraft. More on that a little bit later. In addition to the miniatures, we have little stickers for the symbols of the RAF as well as the Luftwaffe. Then down in the bottom here we have some quick reference sheets, one for each player. As well as we have some tokens, some clouds for terrain, as well as I believe these are some sort of air defense balloons. These are bases that get snapped on to those adjustable bases for the fighters. They represent the pilot's skill as well as some angles and markers for maneuvering. And there's one more token sheet down here in the bottom where we have some pieces for maneuvering the fighters around. So this is a basic measurement ruler. This is used for turning, as well as here are some of the tokens I mentioned for the British and German bombers, as well as keeping track of some of the status of the fighters, including, these are actually, damage is a little bit interesting in this game. We'll talk just about that in a moment. And then these are activation tokens for keeping track of which fighters have gone this turn. Let me get one of the fighters set up for you here. The bases are set up, so there's really only one way to attach the token to the base, as well as the fighter to the stand. The one thing that's kind of a little bit different about the basic rules, I kind of ran through those fairly quickly. It only takes me about 10-15 minutes to read through them, is that each individual fighter doesn't have a stat card to it. So there's no really individual damage to a fighter. They can be in one of 3 states: advantaged, neutral, or disadvantaged. And this kind of reflects not only the little bit of damage taking, but also outmaneuvering and things like that. So it's a little bit of a sort of a non-standard miniature setup. So if you're used to having where units have damage, take so much damage or destroyed, things like that, that doesn't actually exist in this game. What you have to do is, in order to basically get advantages over your opponent, you got to go into the advantage state, and then you outmaneuver and attack your opponent to reduce them to the neutral and disadvantage state. When they're in the disadvantage state, if they're hit by enemy fire, that is when they're destroyed. So when you do build a squadron, there is a point value involved. You can see the Spitfire II is 31 points. And here's our BF 109Es. They're also 31 points, which is kind of convenient for the starter set. And the typical squadron, at least for the starter set, of course, is going to be 6 versus 6. And then the special rules will bring in these bombers in various scenarios. So a little bit ago, I talked about how these tokens here were used for tracking damage, but I also said that fighters themselves don't take damage. So in this game, instead of defeating individual fighters per se, you're trying to defeat the enemy squadron as a whole. Now, when you successfully attack an enemy fighter, the enemy squadron gets a point of damage. So you're not necessarily damaging just that one fighter, the entire squadron is taking basically a morale hit effectively. If you shoot down an enemy fighter or you destroy it, not only is that fighter removed from the game, but then the enemy squadron takes one additional point of damage or morale hit, however you want to, like I said, think about it. It's kind of a abstract damage system. At the end of the round, if a player's received more of these hit tokens, then the current number of aircraft remaining in their squadron, and the idea is a squadron is broken and it's retreated from battle. So this is a game about defeating the entire squadron, and it's not a game where you're going to be fighting down to the last man standing kind of a situation. So let's walk through a turn very quickly of how this would work. Turn order goes first with activating advantaged fighters, then activating neutral fighters, then activating disadvantaged fighters. Then with each of those condition situations, you go from highest pilot skill to the lowest, where this number on the base here, in this case he has a 4, and this guy's a 3, that is their piloting skill level. When a fighter is activated, you go in order of a few steps. The first is you can shoot at enemy fighters. Every fighter, at least in the starter set, has about a 6-inch range, and there's a dice mechanic for rolling for hits, where you factor in the gunnery ability of the pilot, or essentially the pilot's skill, as well as the actual firepower of the fighter itself. Then the defending fighter gets a chance to dodge the hit. If the hit is dodged, it does not affect them, but if the hit is not dodged, they will be downgraded one level from advantaged to neutral, or neutral to disadvantaged. However, one thing is, in order to engage the enemy, you must be basically one condition higher than that target. And there are situations for firing, say, from behind versus firing from the side, or going on to a head-on attack like that. Then after you make your initial attack, a pilot can actually use their advantage and essentially burn that advantage to do special maneuvers, such as go a little bit faster this turn, or do a more fancy, sharper turn kind of a thing. Then you go ahead and perform movement based on your fighter's speed. You don't need to be flying straight at each other, but you would use this ruler here to measure out your movement, as you would see in many miniatures games. And the number here corresponds to the distance that particular fighter would be moving. And then, as part of the movement process, fighters generally can make about a 45-degree turn. Like I said, there are special rules and other advantages that fighters can do to make tighter turns and things like that. And then finally, you have a pilot action, where the pilot can take one additional action, which actually could be shooting, so potentially a pilot could shoot twice in one turn. Or there is something called outmaneuvering, which is a different way to make an enemy go down one advantage level. And that is a skill check between pilots. And then finally, there is climbing for advantage, where essentially you're flying your aircraft up higher in the sky to get an advantage over enemies during the next turn. And you can do one of those 3 things during the pilot action phase. And that concludes pretty much the basic rules for activating a fighter plane. The game plays out like that until, like I said, one side has taken enough of these hit tokens to consider to be retreated from battle. And it is possible to be a draw during the game. So in all, that's the basic gist of the game. There are a few more special rules going on in here, but this base rule book for getting started is only 16 pages long. So I'm hoping I get a chance to play this game in the not too distant future, and I'll certainly be painting up some of these miniatures on an upcoming episode. So be sure to hit subscribe here on this YouTube channel. Once again, I am Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. Thank you guys for watching this first look of Blood Red Skies by Warlord Games.